Hi, Dave.
Oh, hey, Matt.
What's going on? Why don't you introduce yourself for the folks?
I should. I need to reintroduce myself, as this is my debut blogging heads as a blogger for the Washington Post. And you are?
Exciting. I'm Matthew Yglesias. I'm still a fellow and blogger at the Center for American Progress Action Fund, as the lawyers like to say. So you have a brand new and exciting job in the mainstream media. You've left the Soros-funded conspiracy.
I've left both the Soros-funded conspiracy and the Koch-funded conspiracy. I've worked for both of those things, and now I work for a for-profit corporation, which is weird and involves lots of I guess if you want to be nice, you could call them traditions. If you want to be less nice, bureaucratic tangles and messes. And if I add it together, what I feel like is 16 hours of orientation over the course of a week. But that's cool because it's not like I have to do reporting.
Right, and you don't even have a working headset.
No, even that. I just if only there was a Blogging Heads After Dark or Blogging Heads Uncut, viewers could have seen me trying to make a headset work and instead getting my headset to emit loud screaming alien noises into my ear. So I'm holding this. It looks even more like I'm a reporter, so I'm fine with that.
Okay, yeah. But don't reporters use headsets sometimes?
Ezra Klein does, but whatever that's worth.
Well, see, but he's the president for this blogosphere to Washington Post move, right?
Yes, he is. He's the paradigm.
Well, see, right? He's a new paradigm, right?
Yeah.
That was in the article about you.
I think they figured out that if you just put up a lot of content on a website, people read it. And they were doing that before, but just, I have been covering the conservative movement for a very long time, and sorry, it was just another aspect of working in a crowded office is that people come by and you have to nicely say that you're on an hour-long Blogging Heads or say
touch
nothing.
them off. Say I'm way too important.
I don't want to say something like that. No, they figured out that the Ezra Klein model works pretty well. I've been covering the conservative movement for a very long time in blog years. I mean, that's the thing. People make fun of how long I've had a reporting career, but in blog years, it's really like 2,000 years of history. And
I agree.
I've just built this kind of beat where I try and interpret what conservatives are saying without slamming them too hard, without just using them and moving on. I'm trying to cover the whole movement, the Tea Party movement, Republicans, everything, as they march towards the election. And I think there's actually people who do this very well for other organizations.
But have you seen? I mean, you haven't been at the Post long, but I mean, first when you switch from Reason to the Washington Independent, now to the Post, do you feel that people you talk to treat you differently in those roles?
I get calls returned faster. I knew that would happen. Actually, my first really meager job in journalism was at USA Today, and I was able to fact check things or get quotes for things with lightning speed. And then I moved to Reason and couldn't get. I remember one fun experience where I tried to get an interview with Michael Chertoff for a month and kept getting a day that somebody would call me about it that didn't happen. It was really like getting some Xfinity hookup, except with DHS. So now I get calls returned. I'm heading into New Orleans to interview a bunch of Republicans at that event. It's the same thing, but for whatever reason, as much as people want to mock these media institutions, there's something about being in a large organization with lots of fact checkers and lots of standards and readership where you can tell this, and they. I'm still kind of reckoning it. I can't imagine this be interesting to Blogging Heads viewers.
I think it is though, because you see a phenomenon, right, where the quality of a story has a sort of a number of elements that go into it, and some of it has to do with the caliber of the writer, the reporter, but some of it just has to do with who can you get to talk to you, right? And to some extent there's an effect where just someone having the label the Washington Post on him makes him a more effective journalist, right?
I think so. That's my theory. That's what's been happening so far this week. the huge story in this universe right now is the RNC's, is the problem with the RNC. And I have actually been covering that around the edges. But I'm trying to, I don't know, it's a pretty big beat. I'm just trying to get the first take or get the most correct analysis on everything happening on the right. And the RNC is only part of it. I mean, like, the way I've been interpreting that story is that Michael Steele's not really in danger, just because of various factors.
Like what?
Various factors that like 2/3 majority need to remove him. That enough powerful Republican figures are cool with him that they're not actually going to force him out. No one wants the death scalp per se. And the bigger thing happening is that there are lots of conservative institutions that are either launching new things or starting up from scratch just outside the RNC. So he's kind of exacerbating this process. I just, I'll take a while to develop the kind of sources where somebody would pass me that memo first that says somebody's resigning. Because honestly, for all the access, it really is, the people around here who are like very good at their jobs have cultivated relationships where they end up getting past this stuff. I mean, that's blogging is actually kind of exciting because people without any access at all are able to move narratives and to get things. I think like Josh Marshall's Empire has been pretty good at that. The Independent was good at that, but so much of the Beltway journalism is just being here and knowing enough people that you're the guy they decide to leak to. And honestly, that's that's already happened to me in a way that I will not disclose, just because I don't want those stories to be leaked on blogging heads before I write them. But you already. Whereas once I had to scramble for tips, now I just I'm getting some tips.
Sure, but I mean, it's something that I always found a little distasteful about the game as it's played, in that I like to think when I got into writing about politics, I mean, I don't do much of any reporting, and I'm not really sure whether you would even call what I'm doing any kind of journalism. But what I like to think I'm doing when I'm doing it is in some small way making a difference. Writing things that other people would not write, But in a pragmatic sense, when you're trying to get traffic or links or whatever, what a lot of that is about is just sort of pure positional stuff. Like, it's not like it would remain a secret to the world forever that some chief of staff left the RNC, but it's valuable to be like the guy who gets that scoop instead of some other guy. But it seems to me that, what you have in Washington is a town where a majority of the effort is being expended on sort of preempting other reporters rather than on, actually finding something that wouldn't otherwise have come to light. And I feel that, if I think about Dave Weigel, that like the best Dave Weigel stuff is when you have conversations with people that really nobody else would have, not when you sort of get a memo.
True enough. I mean, that's another thing I'm trying to see how I can use the access of a big organization to have more of those interesting conversations. But it's pretty tough because you're in a stream where you're watching other people who are on writing about the same stuff get details of stories first. And you can really either choose to try and get in a position to get this detail of a story first, or you can spend half an hour on the phone or at an event having this conversation that may or may not bear some fruit.
And I mean, a lot more people have kind of moved closer to the space that you've been in for a while, wouldn't you say?
Oh, no, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's actually, again, you change to a new job and you forget how many little things that you had perfectly tweaked out and all the levels were set up. Fine, you need to start over again. So there's certain hours of the day that are being spent on little bureaucratic things and fixing things up that are. I'll check what I've missed, and I've noticed that it's really half the internet that seems to be interested in the thing I was interested in. I mean, I mentioned Josh Marshall and Talking Points Memo, and Talking Points Memo on some given days is basically like a militia news website or a Tea Party sign website, and it didn't used to be. I mean, when I started this beat, TPM actually, they were interviewing people in early 2009. They eventually ended up hiring Christina Billantoni for White House coverage, and indeed she covers the White House. But TPM clearly puts less of a emphasis on White House coverage than of like getting the court document about the crazy person who threatened somebody. And maybe I don't know if I'm reading the site for those stories because I want to be on. That's what I'm writing about too. It just seems like there's a lot more of that, and that's at Think Pro. You've always been very wonky, and you'll write about something right wing if you feel like you can inform on it. You're always you get these fights against two people who are being hacks or whatever. But like Think Progress is not a Obama administration news site. It is a look what this crazy right winger did site.
Right. I mean, and Think Progress has had, a different version of covering the right, but very close to sort of its mission from the beginning. But it has been interesting to see so much. I think a somewhat deliberate strategy from the progressive movement to kind of highlight the idea that there's a lot of craziness in the conservative grassroots, and to focus a lot of attention on that. And it's, it's hard to know. Because one reason people do that is simply because it's interesting. Which it is. But another reason people do that, or at least initially started doing it, was the sense that, there could be political benefits to the left for it. And I think it's sort of a mistake of tactics and strategy. I don't think that anything of note has been achieved by progressives for highlighting the fact that there are weird signs at Tea Party.
Well, I think towards the election, some stuff will be achieved. And honestly, I think I've said this on BHTV before, that the purest test of conservative movement activism in Tea Parties was actually the New York 23 special election in which they lost. Like, there have been some other fluky elections, but, let's look at Bob McDonnell in Virginia, for example. He ran as a pragmatist who would not have Sarah Palin campaign for him. Right. Honestly, it was an issue. Like, Democrats were dogging him about Sarah Palin. He ended up getting past it because the Democrat who ran against him was terrible. Other things happened. But, he didn't. He's ended up governing in a way very differently than he ran. He didn't run as the candidate of the Tea Party. So I see if you're a Democratic strategist, it makes sense. Or if you're some sort of liberal organization that want to link to somebody, makes sense to link to a reporter who's writing about the crazy right-wing stuff.
Sure. Although
certainly. There's another aspect of this that, I don't know how long I want to talk about it, but, like, I've also noticed, as I've done more reporting, if you get the emails from the party committees in a given day, and you maybe get these emails too, just to alert them on something. Yeah, it is like, there's the occasional, Organizing for America, I guess we just won on healthcare, let's congratulate everyone, whereas, everything else from the party committees is just like the latest link to the latest person who picked up some oppo about a crazy Tea Partier.
Right.
So, like, the incentives there are all to write about this stuff. And, I write about it because it's interesting and because I kind of care about the conservative movement. I didn't mean to laugh when I was saying that. It was more like a wistful... I'm thinking about how long I've been part of it. I like Reason Magazine, I like Cato, and I like all these. I like Tom Coburn. I guess everyone likes Tom Coburn now that he complimented Nancy Pelosi. But I like all these things, so I cover it. I'm not like some Democratic strategist airdropped in to smear people. But I've watched as more people are interested in smearing people, the field get a lot more crowded.
Well, right, but I don't know. Bob McDonnell, is an interesting sort of example because, he really did run. He ran as a conservative and on conservative themes, but he definitely didn't run as one of these, like, what we need to do is be more right-wing than ever kind of guys. And very explicitly, it seemed to me, at least, the interpretation was that, he was conceding Virginia's transformation into a, not down the line conservative state, and saying that, he was going to come in and run things well and try to keep taxes reasonably low, and that this brouhaha that's been caused by his decision to start celebrating a Confederate History Month. It does, I guess, illustrate the point people are trying to make by pointing at the Tea Parties, which is that, conservative, not random guys at Tea Parties, but actually, the leaders of the conservative movement are extremely conservative, in a way that I think is not always well understood and not always what they are demonstrating to them, how they're presenting themselves.
Well, McDonnell's like a classic Matt Yglesias villain, basically, because I blog a little bit at the news site, which I should mention is called Right Now. I should start plugging that. But I've blogged a little bit about this. Because I'm at the Post and I've got these access to these archives, and I was just double checking based on some advice from this really good blogger who'd been in Virginia for a long time. McDonnell's history with saluting the Confederacy, and there's actually quite a bunch of it. He was always a very, very, very conservative Republican, or like the Virginia Republican Party basically has become. And in 2002, he introduced a new pledge. Actually, it was in 2001. No, it was 2002, because Virginia. So let me go back over this.
Right.
To ungarble it. So Mark Warner is elected governor of Virginia in 2001, but because of redistricting, Republicans gained a lot of seats in the House of Delegates. So Warner has the option to continue this tradition of Confederate History Month, and he decides not to. But at the same time, McDonnell, who's just a delegate, introduces this new pledge that people are going to recite at the beginning of sessions. That's all about the Commonwealth. Right. And there's nothing that offensive about it, but then the Richmond Times-Dispatch and the Post report that it's word for word from a Confederate group's pledge. Mm-hmm. So McDonnell's response, and I wrote a little bit about this, and our people are really going back, is he wasn't like a Lester Maddox figure, but he was just complaining that all these people were getting all emotional about this part of Virginia's important history. And one of the quotes I found from Michael Shear's coverage in the Post was, are we supposed to not salute the founding fathers because they had slaves, and we're just to write everything in American history involved? And that's like, you read a lot about this classic, this idea among some Republicans that the biggest problem in America with race is that white people are occasionally accused of racism. So he didn't do that and ran for governor. That's
I heard. I was listening to WTOP, our local news channel, in a taxi earlier today, and they were covering this story, and they had various sort of sound bites from people on different sides, with mostly the pro-Confederate people sort of trotting out the kind of standard line that it's about our history, it's not about slavery kind of thing, blah blah blah. But one woman says, well, they have Black History Month, so why can't we have Confederate History Month? When there's obviously
I can answer that
a lack of parallel there, but it's telling of I think an important section of sort of the white conservative mind in the United States sees any sort of expression of Black identity or solidarity or progress as a kind of assault on white America, such that somehow a Black History Month is comparable to a Confederate History Month. In a way that I think to some of us it's clear why those are not precisely equivalent situations. And you see, I think, again, that the same phenomenon in this idea, which has, I think, now become fully entrenched inside the conservative media, that nobody used the N-word at John Lewis at that rally, and that this is all, a vicious lie that a handful of Democratic congressmen and their lackeys in the media have invented. when, you know, I mean, of course, there's no evidence sort of one way or another on this, but it bespeaks to there's an attitude of besiegement that white America is under this kind of constant assault from overzealous anti-racist advocates.
Yeah, that's basically, well, I'm trying to think of the way they describe it, because I think there's a universal agreement on that point among conservatives, and I was on a radio show my first day where John Sununu, who used to be the chief of staff, is now running the New Hampshire Republican Party, kind of endorsed what you were talking about. It was a little bit jarring, because Andrew Breitbart and a lot of media figures make this argument, but it was really kind of jarring to hear somebody who used to be the chief of staff argue that it's just insane to claim that there was racism on display at this Tea Party, and it's a total lie. And I was in the position of sparring with him and pointing him to this video that shows somebody being spit on. But yeah, I mean the way that they frame it though is this, that the calling somebody racist shuts off debate about important issues. And this is how I'm getting really sympathetic with this. This is how the left, keeps minorities in a position of economic servitude and failure, is because they demand, they want their vote all the time. They give them handouts, but they refuse to let any national conversation begin about the handout giving process, because they'll just scream racist and that shuts it down. And if this sounds kind of silly, I think it's because it is. But there are people who write about race who I think are more sophisticated than us on the right. But Shelby Steele seems to have gone in this direction, and he was for a long time the most thoughtful African American conservative writer on this topic. He seems to have just come around to this idea that no one will criticize Barack Obama because he's black, which is kind of crude and stupid. But that's kind of the height of this argument. It's not that there's anyone racist in the Tea Parties. It's that the media wants to call everyone in the Tea Parties racist because they don't want anyone to criticize Barack Obama, and that's not really true.
Right. I mean, and I think that I don't know. There was a kind of a similar thing when I forget what it was. This Erickson put some new manifesto together, like a couple months ago, right?
Yeah.
Right, and he had they sort of said in the quotes around that it was supposed to harken back to the Sharon statement that William F. Buckley had put together, and I did a tweet about this, and I said, do the people doing this statement realize that that the Sharon statement was a support of segregation? And, it's not that I thought that Eric Erickson and, 2010 era conservative activists, support segregation or, have a secret plan to reinstate Jim Crow. But it's this element that's been just sort of, written out of conservatives' consciousness of the whole thing. And then I got a lot of brushback from people saying, no, read the document. Nowhere in it does it say, oh, segregation is horrible. And it's true, it is great, rather. And it's true, it doesn't. But, I mean, it's written in 1960 at a time when the Civil Rights Act is being hotly debated. And it's just all full of talk about, federalism and overreach by the national government and judicial activists and blah, 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 blah. And, anyone who looks back, I think in a fair-minded way as to, what was the argument in American politics at that point will say, yeah, this was an argument about race. I mean, it's not really an argument about federalism any more than anything else ever has been. Which isn't to say that, anyone who ever says, oh, we should leave the speed limit up to the states, that's like a stalking horse for racism. But at the same time, it's also true that, when the leading issue in the country was civil rights, people who were against the Civil Rights Act and against the Civil Rights Movement, were supporting segregation.
No, that's true. And I don't want to... That reminds me not to really mesh together and conflate a lot of what I was talking about earlier. I mean... I don't actually think it's a huge problem for America that Bob McDonnell wants Confederate History Month. I don't think it was a massive problem that he introduced this pledge. I think there were silly things to do that were insensitive, and I think it would be silly if some New York legislator wanted to introduce like a Weatherman History Week or something. It's stupid to do because you're saluting something that offends people and that was actually kind of violent, whatever. But the one conservative argument about this is that all the left wants to do is have these fights about this sort of thing because they have nothing left to stand for. I mean, you see those arguments in National Review pretty frequently, less so now. But when Kwesi Mfume and Julian Bond are running it, they were accused by the right of only ever having one of these symbolic fights about Confederate flags in places, and that is a symbol. This is all a symbol of how far this stuff has progressed in America. The problem is that it just cuts off serious debate about policy. You're not allowed to have a debate about how policy affects different races differently. There are examples of this I'm blanking on a bit right now. I guess Glenn Beck's campaign against Van Jones, I think, was actually an example of more troublesome conservative relationship to race than a Confederate salute, because he was knocking Jones for saying things like pollution affects. The way he said it was inflammatory. It was like pollution's killing our people or our communities.
Right.
Actually. There's some interesting research on which communities are affected by pollution and who would benefit from various environmental regulations.
Well, and also something I think strikes me sort of watching the right watch the left is that as someone who's on the left and involved in a progressive political advocacy organization and also public education. Is that it's good to sort of put out propaganda to make the other side look bad, and it's also good to try to understand what's actually happening in an analytically accurate kind of way. And one reason I think it's good that you. One thing that I think is valuable about your coverage is that you've worked in conservative institutions and have a real relationships with people who are in them. And something that strikes me watching Glenn Beck is that the right is getting an image of the left that's just wrong, and not in a I'm upset that Glenn Beck is lying about my colleagues kind of way, but in that if you want to do politics, it serves your interests to understand what's happening, and that if you look at Van Jones and if you look at that particular
who
statement,
now is a cap again, right?
Right,
yeah.
and well, to an extent, I've seen him here once. We were on a panel together.
I was on a panel with him once too. It's
there
fine.
There you go. And, if you want to understand, what is Van Jones all about, right? And it's about the fact that the Progressive Coalition has this problem, which is that a lot of its members are very concerned about the environment, believe this is a very important issue. Those people tend to be more economically upscale, have a lot of money to give to contribute to different things. Then another important part of the Progressive Coalition is labor unions, and yet another important part of the Progressive Coalition is racial minority groups and civil rights organizations. And it's not always obvious that, working class African Americans care that much emotionally about something like climate change. And Van's work has been all about, trying to build conceptual and emotional and ideological bridges to help hold the Progressive Coalition together. And so, when he addresses a minority group and is talking about pollution and as a civil rights issue, right? I mean, this isn't it's not evidence of a conspiracy to get whitey. It's evidence of an effort to hold together an actually fractious group. And I think developing a more sophisticated understanding of what's happening would actually make conservatives more effective at trying to pick that coalition apart instead of driving people together by kind of flinging crazy allegations.
Yeah, I don't like that either. I mean, I think actually it's very good for ratings and for fundraising, but it is something that's making people more ignorant. And I'm always trying to go back. I know there's a thing that the MSM does, and liberals hate it. Maybe they should hate it. There are reasons, times I hate it too, but I always try to go back and think of liberals in their darkest hour doing the same thing to the right.
Mm-hmm.
That happened. I mean, there were people looking for the deep-seated connections between the worst members of the religious right and every element of the Republican Party.
Right.
It was like Rod Parsley was behind everything that was happening in Ohio Republican politics. John Hagee, same thing. I mean, like, whoever is out of power, one does a lot of kind of nut picking is the words people use to do this, because one, they can win some victories, and two, the act of doing it as well as winning the victory gets money, gets like the base excited.
Right.
The problem with that, because I think it's one thing when it happens, with a political cause, it's another when it happens to the media figure who informs everyone in the cause.
Right.
And there's just a lot of misinformation has been spread on it, like because of that. And it's a thing I cover, but I don't think it's really good for the country to have a lot of people who are angry about the federal government informed that the problem is a bunch of black nationalists who want to turn us into communists. That wasn't good. I mean, actually, I think I didn't hate the healthcare debate because I thought, with the exception of some weird lies that got through, it actually was about policy, and it was about conservatives just rejecting the idea of everyone buying into a national system. And everyone buying a mandate. Like, that actually was pretty policy.
I mean, to an extent, that's what it was about. But I mean, you keep seeing things like, I read just yesterday, Veronique Dore. Is that how you say her name?
Dore.
Dore, yes.
And I know her.
After sort of throwing up this completely bogus conspiracy theory about stimulus money being directed to Democratic congressional districts and being, I think, decisively refuted.
Well, the refutation was, go over the refutation.
So she went and she said, all the stimulus money is going to Democratic congressional districts. And so then Nate Silver pointed out that the biggest recipients of the stimulus money are just state capitals, because money is going as aid to state governments. So, I mean, that's a policy choice that you can debate, but it's not it's just not what she said it was at all. Like, at all. She went and she testified before Congress based on a study where she hadn't done any kind of routine checks at all, because she is, I don't know why exactly, but because, she's invested in the idea of exposing conspiracies. And then, she got sort of rebuffed on this, and then just yesterday or Monday was out on the corner at National Review's blog, with an explanation of how Obamacare is really a secret plot to foist single-payer health care on the country. And she had a thing, and, I'm sure if you don't know what you're talking about, you can find some superficial plausibility in it. But, it's just wrong. I mean, believe me, there's a lot of people who would be thrilled if that's what Barack Obama's health care plan was.
Well, the public option wasn't it?
Right, but it's not in there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why people were upset, right? I mean, and
the mandate's not, though. Not at least the way liberals conceived it.
No, I mean, and there's an enormous kind of discourse of that. Now, I don't want to say that no one on the left has ever made that kind of assertion about the right, but normally, if you look at conservative political figures, the normal way I know that they're really seriously conservative is that they just say all the time, like, about how conservative they are, right? I mean, there's a handful of Republicans who are not, like, self-avowed members of the conservative wing of the Republican Party, but it's a minority of them. And there's this sort of total unwillingness, it seems to me, on the part of the right to acknowledge that some people who are Democrats, including like Larry Summers and Peter Orszag and Tim Geithner and Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and Robert Gates, are like actually not as left-wing as other people in the Democratic Party.
That's true. I mean, that's a reason I find that the crazier stuff here kind of kind of frustrating, as good as to cover. I mean, it really is something I wrestle with, because I just don't want to have a bunch of posts pointing out the weirdest thing said about some mainstream Democratic figure that day. But I don't want to, and it's also just annoying. I mean, this is one thing I don't think the left did. I don't think the left identified, fairly squishy members of the Bush administration and accused them of bringing the nation toward fascism. They train their fire on like Donald Rumsfeld and people in the Bush Justice Department and John Yoo and like whatever you think of those guys. If you're a conservative who defends them, I think part of the defense of them is just glee at how much the left hates these people. That's always a factor. But you would even admit that the left hates them because they were the most extreme defenders, litigators, adherents of this very conservative policy.
Right. I mean, they were actually more conservative than the other guys.
Whereas the right really will take on Tim Geithner, who is really. I mean, if Obama ends up being a failed one-term president, he will be history's greatest monster for liberals because, Obama comes in with a huge majority, most liberal voting records in the Senate, according to National Bureau. We all know what that means. Sure. Part of the country is always going to hate him, and he, instead of, appointing Paul Krugman to the Treasury, appoints this guy who was right there helping out Goldman Sachs when the economy crashed. Like, if you're a socialist, it's a terrible thing to do. It'd really be like, Sarah Palin gets elected president and appoints, like, Norm Ornstein to some important position. Right. some terrible deal maker who doesn't upset any cards. Like, he's become a huge demon. It's
I mean, because you hear a lot of talk, in America about, how it's sad that we can't be more moderate and people can't come together, and I mean, normally that's discussed in sort of a parallel way. And, I mean, of course, it's true that there are people on the left, I mean, including senators, members of Congress, important people who have no interest in compromising with the right. But I do think that, if you want to understand political polarization in the United States in a real way, you do have to understand that it's been pretty overwhelmingly one-sided in exactly the way that you say it is. That when Barack Obama appoints some more moderate people to his administration, you don't see anyone on the right being like, glad that guy came in. I hope Obama spends a lot of time listening to him instead of those other guys, which is... just not at all sort of the left's reaction. I mean, in some ways, like, one of the favored sports when Bush was president was to bemoan the fact that more moderate members of the administration, like Colin Powell, Christy Whitman, et cetera, weren't sort of having more influence. There wasn't some, like, crazy idea that, like, actually they were all secretly part of the most right-wing faction out there. And to me, I mean, I don't know. It's one thing to sort of like put misinformation out there to confuse like swing voters or whatever, but it seems to me that sort of conservative media does a lot of misleading of its own audience.
I think so. Sometimes. Beck is an interesting case because it's a real open question of how much of this he understands or believes, and how much of it he's just hyping.
Right.
With people inside the conservative movement, I think the reason they believe this is because they're all basically Hayekians who think that any move at all in the direction of statism is a move towards total state control of everything. This is, I guess, a difference with liberals. Maybe they don't think this of everyone on the right. They're happy to find the person once in a while they can form an alliance with. But if you're a Republican senator, or if you're a Heritage, you don't really care that some Obama nominee is supposed to be a little bit more moderate than somebody else. Mm-hmm. Actually, remember, anyone they appoint is going to be awful.
Right.
Anyone you can filibuster, that's going to be good because either forget if he's even forget this question if he's like some sort of suitor type nominee for some position who's really covering up his agenda. It's just they're all going to be basically liberal, and that's all even has to be stopped, so they got to stop it. Whereas I think liberals are much happier with half measures. Liberals are happy if they could get a couple of moderates.
Right.
They appointed more. They approved more Bush nominees for various positions than Republicans have approved Obama nominees. So they're like, yeah, well, he's giving us a pass on this. And they only pitch the real fights with like Janice Rogers Brown. I mean, part of the the Tea Parties aren't really behind this. It's the conservative infrastructure and the GOP that are just gotten really good at doing, what do you call it? Not even background checks, just oppo on people for everything. So it'd be wasted their time and their skill to not make Goodwin Liu into a new monster.
But I mean, well, so I mean, I would draw a distinction here. I mean, because Goodwin Liu is not the Stalinist that he's being painted as by the right. But it is accurate to say that Goodwin Liu is a progressive, and is more left wing than some other people who Democrats have nominated for judgeships, right? So, I mean, by saying, okay, well, we're going to target Goodwin Liu, that's at least rational. Whether or not it's totally done in a scrupulous way or not, that's another question. But I mean, the question I have is sort of just a bigger version of the question David Frum raised about the right's tactics on healthcare, which is that doesn't it become a point where it's actually counterproductive to not draw these distinctions? That it's not like Barack Obama is going to not govern the country if none of his nominees can be confirmed. If Lael Brainerd is a relatively moderate Democrat, why not vote and put her in as Undersecretary of Treasury for International Affairs? I mean, conservatives are showing that they're good at holding people up in committee by holding everyone up in committee, but what are they achieving exactly? I mean, for conservatism, how by anyone's lights, certain people, sure, but I mean, the failure to draw distinctions between, legislative initiatives, personnel, all that strikes me as counterproductive and I mean, useful from the, I want you to listen to my radio show perspective, but not so useful from a, I care about what happens to the country perspective.
Well, but they do this because they care about what happens to the country. Anyone appointed by Barack Obama is necessarily going to be worse than having something vacant. Mm-hmm. I mean, the difference in the last couple of weeks is that they've had a couple of long-term pitch battles and then lost on them. And healthcare was one, but the one that's I think a little bit less well covered is definitely a little bit less is the National Labor Relations Board situation, where Obama was willing to cut a compromise and appoint a liberal with a conservative who's selected by Mike Enzi, and then Enzi, we don't know why. You kind of know why everything happens in the Senate and the Republican conference. I'm sure it was discussed that not letting Craig Becker on this thing would be a good idea. So they just decided to block it, and then in response, months later, Obama recess appoints Becker and a liberal, so that the Labor Relations Board is going to be majority liberal and liberal that way. Healthcare, we're going to go back over the same thing happened. If we just don't compromise on anything, then we're going to break these people. You read about this a lot, like how conservatives have this vision of, or this history in which Barry Goldwater changed America for the better by losing, because then the conservative movement grew up. But what actually happened was that had Democrats only gained a couple of seats, and LBJ only beaten Nelson Rockefeller by 7 points, then Democrats wouldn't have had this majority to radically change America.
Right. I mean, the stuff the conservatives
in this case, had Republicans just Chuck Grassley bailed a little bit and worked with Olympia's. I guess the final Senate bill Olympia Snow was part of was still more conservative than when it ended up passing through the Congress, right? Yeah, if they just compromise on that point, all right, you guys have the majority, we'll let you do this. And instead, they've created this long-term entitlement that they can't get rid of. So, you think it goes back to this kind of Hayek vision of because I hadn't thought of it that way, but I guess it's true that if it's all about the road to serfdom, then sort of the quantities don't matter. Yeah, I mean it's more it's more extreme than I think Democrats in this country do, and it's something you can't do in other countries, frankly, because other countries are majoritarian, and you're not in a position where you can just take these risks with having lost the election, block a bunch of stuff. You just don't have the power to. But that's why I try and keep one head in what I'm doing, one head in like the rest of the political world. Certainly, like the fact that all I do all day is talk to conservatives and read conservatives makes it feel like they're opposing everything.
Right.
There's really no one who gets a pass. The only person who can survive is somebody who's just got an impeccable resume and there'll be blowback if they oppose them. And Republicans ended up. It's tough to say. We don't know what happened with Sotomayor yet, if they're going to have long-term damage from opposing this nominee. But because they tried to make the debate about her being a racist, then they feel like they got a pass. You basically need the nominee or the bill to be so overwhelmingly popular that you can't do that. And then, you've written about this too. If you most times, if you just start from a position where you polarize and make the initiative look like a Democratic liberal initiative, or make the nominee look like a controversial liberal, then you can win. I mean, even with Becker, it was a defeat for conservatives in the end. But every time Becker's name is mentioned, he's mentioned as the conservative, the controversial nominee. Well, he's controversial because Dick Morris says he is. Because the controversy is great. Because it became controversial for a Democratic president with ties whose party is.
Well, no, I mean, right. I mean, it's just restating the obvious, right? That like Democrats have support labor unions, but if you say it in a certain kind of way, it's controversial instead of banal, right?
Yeah. That's a word. There's a couple of words I try and ban. I don't think I succeed. I'm sure if I mentioned it and people paid enough attention, I would fail to get them out of my blog. But I try never use the word controversial. I try never use seem, as in this new development seems like something. I
should
can't
probably write
prove
seem.
that it is. I notice it more in news articles. There really is. We opened the conversation by talking about the new media stuff, and I do notice that. Liberal sites and conservative sites are able, with diligence and proof that they can get readers over to them, to have biased articles that still break news. And I noticed that in some of these sites that break a lot. There'll be a lot of articles like this. Here's the press release we got. Here's my analysis of why all the developments work. Well, what's going on here. I try not to. I mean, I feel like. If you report things straight, that's not as interesting as what these people are doing, honestly. I feel like there are very few, your analysis is valuable if you're reporting something that's very complicated or if your source is completely lying to you. But otherwise, you should be able to prove it. You shouldn't have to say seems. You shouldn't have to say controversial because somebody's press release says somebody's controversial.
All right. So with that controversy, maybe we should bring this to a close, get some more posts up on the blogs.